Abigail here with the astrology and tarot for this eclipse in Leo. It's a solar eclipse, so it is a new moon eclipse. It is at 12:45 p.m. CDT on the 12th of August, and it's a doozy. It's a big one. So understanding eclipses, solar eclipses tend to be kind of external in the world. Not that you don't see world events on the other eclipse, on like the lunar eclipses, but this is like people in power. Yes, it impacts your own life, but like if we're talking about mundane astrology, it's like people in power, psychopomps, those things, they're all in a tizzy over these eclipses. It's important to note that the current sitting person for the US is an eclipse person. So these things have a lot to do with that. Eclipse people tend to be catalysts of things, and they also tend to be figureheads, or figures aren't quite the right word, but they do tend to be like the concentration of a societal issue or problem, or the concentration of an idea. They often represent more than just themselves, eclipse people. So this is a really big moment. The eclipse portals are always unstable. It's when I basically always say this in my videos. It's like you start at like point B and you end up at point J, and you're like, what happened in between? And it's a neutral effect, so you could be moved to a place that you're not too pleased about, or you could end up somewhere really great. I do personally believe that eventually eclipses will take you somewhere really great. You just may not know it for the first 6 months. They do tend to cause chaos and havoc. And with this being in Leo, this is about people in power and in rulership. Leo is known for being this kind of very visible sign, this sign that contains a lot of power and individuality. And so we're moving through this energy, and people are really people who are overconfident are going to go way overboard. I will say the opportunity with an eclipse like this is that maybe you have low self-esteem, or maybe you struggle to like value yourself. Use the energy of this eclipse to like put yourself in like a good a good and like healthy place of value. But you are going to see people who are into themselves, or who have issues around ego. And I don't believe that the ego has to die. I think the ego is actually essential to the human psyche, because it's like it gives us a sense of who we are. But an unchecked ego under an eclipse is like a bull in a china shop. So there's gonna be a lot of people acting erratic, doing stuff. I will say during eclipses, psychosis can get pretty high. So, we're gonna see people acting erratically. Take care of yourself, protect yourself. Also, mental health can be a little tough during eclipses, so check in on your friends. It's just a lot of energy all at once. Now, the eclipses happen at the north and south lunar node, and the node's purpose is alignment, not only in this life, but in other lifetimes. And so eclipses are also an opportunity to realign. I would definitely check where your nodes are in your chart and how they are interacting with these nodes. If you have fixed nodes, this is either a return in opposition or a square. Um, if you have, immutable nodes, they have to be, you know, in some configuration, but you might have an aspect. And if you have a Cancer Capricorn node, or if you have, why is my mind blanking, a Pisces Virgo node, these are in conjunct. So there's actually a bit of separation. So check that out in your chart, look at that. It'll give you better insight. Also, I'll say this, eclipses are a great time to get readings because the energy is so heightened. I also love to do energetic work during eclipses. By the time I put this out, I will have already started my class on psychic connection. It is not a mistake that I plan to do it during the eclipses, because it is a time when I find that people are more energetically open. Is it a crazy wild time? But it gives you more access and more ability to move things forward. Now, move things forward materially, not so much. I find you get more traction spiritually and energetically, whereas the stuff happening out in the world, the stuff happening in your life that is material, very hard to control, and I suggest that you don't try. My kind of go-to for eclipses is you clear as much as you can beforehand, and if you truly want to be on your path and your purpose, you have to be okay with things being removed. Important to note, especially with these eclipses, is this is our second eclipse on this axis. It's our first Leo eclipse on this axis. And we're having, as its partner eclipse in Virgo season, we're having the final Pisces eclipse. We'll have another Virgo eclipse at the end of the year, but this is our final Pisces eclipse. So look where Leo is in your chart, what house it's in, what the subject is, what it rules, and also look where Pisces is. It'll tell you a lot about the cycle that's closing. I'm going to give a personal example because that's the easiest. But I have the Pisces in my seventh house. Saturn and Neptune were going through there recently, as long with the North Node. And I had a pretty bombastic separation from a long-term partner. This, while I've been separated for, a little, coming up on a year in the fall, I'm still closing doors to that and working through energetic stuff and healing. And so while I don't know exactly what this eclipse is bringing, I know it has something to do with this ending of this cycle, the finishing out of this, the closing off of something happening in my seventh house of relationships. This can also be friendships. I've had a lot of turnover with friends and family recently, so I expect to see something like that showing up. So yeah, take that example, pop it in any part of your chart. In the 10th house, this could have something to do with career or your legacy or the things that you are known for. You could have had to make a very major kind of public identity switch in the last 18 months. If it's in like the second house, it could be about your money, your talents, your skill sets. In the third house, you might be graduating, or finishing up a cycle of education. So you could take a peek at that to see how these are personally affecting you. But eclipses are big stuff, and they're an opportunity to move forward in more alignment. I do find, especially with this cycle in particular, because I've talked to other astrologers, and I did the horoscopes over at Astro School with B, the Zine Witch. I know, Zine Witch, Keen Witch. We picked those names before we knew each other. B, a long time before we knew each other, and for me, a few years. Um, but this is also very generational, so we're seeing like generations pitted against each other. We're watching the rise and fall of different generations. Older generations are kind of falling because that's just what happens with age, and this is an opportunity for younger generations to rise up. And by younger, I don't mean like Gen Z necessarily. Gen X and the millennials have been pretty suppressed when it comes to politics and stuff, at least when it comes to like the big kind of Leo solar energy of like politics and government and rulers and people in power. And so this is an opportunity to switch the table. I know Chani has been talking a lot on threads and other places about how we're going to see major governmental shifts, which I agree. But yeah, solar eclipses are often directly associated with the death of the king. Which king remains to be seen. We will find out once we get into it. But I just want you to kind of take in how big and energetically impactful you're probably. I mean, if you're sitting here watching this, you probably have already felt it. I've seen stuff already happening in my life that I'm like, could this have happened a little closer to the the Pisces eclipse, so I don't have to wait so long to see how this ends? And I mean, it's not that long. It's gonna be like what, 2 weeks? But I'm like, I'm already seeing relational themes coming up, and themes around how I value myself and how I set my standards when it comes to boundaries in relationships, which is also tailing out that finish up of that Saturn cycle. Because while Saturn has been in Aries and the nodes have moved, we're still wrapping up these themes with the eclipses because they happened in tandem. And that's how astrology works. There's very few direct delineations when it comes to lines. Like, yeah, a planet moves out of a sign, but the kind of unraveling and the finishing up, or the wrapping up of energy, is a process. So even though everything is moved, you could be finishing out that Saturn cycle because that Saturn cycle is tied to the nodes, and the nodes are tied to the eclipses. So we have this at 20 degrees. Interestingly enough, the lunation itself doesn't have a whole lot of astrological impact because everything's at early degrees. It is kind of roughly within orb. Depends on what your orb is. It's like just out of orb. And it's also separating because of the retrograde, but Saturn is a little bit involved. There are consequences coming in. I also think with, Saturn and Jupiter, while we can see lots of endings and bombastic beginnings and big cycles wrapping up, I also think it's an opportunity to test boundaries and try your luck. Also, a lot of stuff that you are attempting that might seem kind of like a sudden idea, or might seem like, oh, I might just try this one thing, might turn out to be very long term and very intense, and like something that you're like, oh, I had no idea what the impact of this thing would be. And once again, it's neutral. It could be an impact that you're like, yay, I loved it, or an impact where it's like, ooh, that was a lesson. depends on the personal chart. But there's just a lot happening around it. And I think it's important to take a look at the full sky. We have an air trine with Uranus, Pluto, and Venus. So even if you don't have Leo or Aquarius or Virgo or Pisces in the seventh house, with Venus under so much scrutiny from these big planets, this eclipse has tons to do about relationships, has tons to do about connections, regardless of where it is in your chart. Because we're being asked to to ask what our boundaries are, to ask to think about things differently with Uranus, but also to, with Pluto, to stay true to what is true to us. So it's about these big changes, but also aligning with what we are and who we are and what our journey as a soul is. And then you kind of throw in the relationships just to make it a little more complicated because relationships are how we often experience most of our lives. Very few people do not experience the majority of their life through the lens of some form of relationship. And even if you can argue that someone doesn't, relationships can be with anything: society, the land, animals, plants. Human relationships aren't the only connections that we have. So this is really big. We also have Venus sextile Mercury and Jupiter, which I think is actually honestly really lovely and kind of um, I don't know, soothing in a sense. It's almost like a little bit of a balm on top of the chaos of Uranus and Pluto making this beautiful grand trine in the sky. I also think that as long as you are true to yourself, Jupiter and Mercury are going to take the boundaries and take the decisions and take the things that you have put out into the universe and actually make something really beautiful out of them. Especially with Jupiter and Leo and Mercury and Leo, you standing up for yourself and aligning with what's in your heart. I do think this means that some people are going to show up to push your boundaries. It could be a romantic interest, it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could also just be an interaction with a stranger that really makes you think or really kind of forces you to look at the way you're handling something or the way that you're connecting with something. Sorry, my hair is driving me nuts. I just showered and for some reason this like one hair is like must stay the center of the forehead. Anyways, I've taken care of that annoyance. Um, we also have, Mercury trine Jupiter and not Mercury trine, Mercury and Jupiter trine Neptune. So there's also an element of like deep, rich spirituality. The people that you're connecting with at this time are absolutely going to be past life, but it's about knowing what their role is. And it's about not thinking that every person that shows up is meant to be a long lasting person. I say if someone shows up now, they are an eclipse person. They are here to teach you a lesson for the eclipses, and very few of them are going to last after. Or if they do, they have to change shape because you can't always live in an eclipse dynamic with someone. It's too much pressure, and when you do, it can be very toxic. Eclipses are meant to be for a period of time, and to have and to work on things, and then they move on, and we process, and then we come to another cycle. Now, if you are an eclipse person, this might be very different for you. So it only applies to non-eclipse people when I say that, but it is really intense. Also recognizing that this is a south node eclipse, so this is a releasing, this is a processing, this is a purging and a cleansing in a sense. So wherever this lies in your chart, you are experiencing some kind of release and letting go. There might be grief with it, but it might also be a really nice, you might have a nice sense of relief after these eclipses. During the eclipse portal, maybe not. That 2 weeks between eclipses can be a rough, or at least so energetically like chaotic that it's like, I would much rather deal with all these things separately. But just know that this is super impactful. Also, at the same time, we've got Mercury opposed Pluto, so people are telling on themselves. Secrets are coming out. People are telling on themselves. People also, you're going to see people kind of cracking and breaking a bit mentally around this time if people's habits aren't healthy and supporting them. And I'm not talking about, this is not from a perspective of like, oh, they should have better, healthier habits. More of just like, if your life is that way, you're going to see the strain and the cracks. The reason I say this is because I believe that most stressors and choices that we make are often the result of outside pressures that we don't really have a whole lot of say in. Also important to note, Mars is now in Cancer and will have just moved into Cancer. And so we we get this moment where um, now we have something in water, and we've had everything in air and fire for a few days. So there is also a little bit of a dampening going on, especially with it being Mars, which is, a fiery planet. I will say personally, and I know it's hard for y'all, but I do love a Mars with a native whose native is in Cancer. Like I don't know, I'm saying this wrong. I love a native with a Cancer Mars situation. Does it cause its own individual struggles in relationships? Yes. I have been on the receiving end, but I do find it to be a really thoughtful placement that desires safety and care, which is why it's in fall in Cancer, because Mars isn't necessarily the normal archetype is not tenderness, which is why it can be an issue because where are you going to get that kind of aggression in the chart that you need to move things forward, basically. But I do love it. I find it to be very comforting. I find Mars and Cancer people to be very lovely and generous folks. Anyways, that's also counterbalancing this moment. So there's just a lot changing and shifting. I do think there's a lot of support in this moment if you are able to see the bright side, and recognize that we are going to get through this, and on the other side I do truly believe there's a lovely sense of expansion and release, especially into this final Pisces eclipse. So if you're feeling really constricted and like you're losing tons of stuff, know that so much changes during eclipses. I have had people, and actually I still remember this, when I was first, I'm not on TikTok anymore, but when I was first on TikTok, I never really got tons of traction over there. But I had this one person, they were clearly, I did something about eclipses, and they were clearly like seeking some comfort. They're like, I got this job and then they randomly let me go after like a few weeks, and I took me months to get the job and I don't know what's happening. And I was like, I was early astrologer, put my little prediction hat on, and was just like, and a lot of my astrology is astrology with psychic channeling, and I didn't realize that at the time. But I was like looking at the astrology, and she gave me some of her chart details, and I was like, you know what? You lost the job for a reason, and you're going to get a new one by the end of the eclipses. And what happened? I got a little note a few months after the eclipses on my TikTok that she was like, yeah, it absolutely happened. I got a job right after the eclipses were over. It's a much better job. Looking back, that other job wasn't meant for me. And so that's something that can happen during eclipses that is positive. But in that 2 week period, it can be difficult to kind of hold, oh, things are changing and shifting, and there's magic and there's possibility in this. And everything's falling apart, and I don't know what the future is, and I'm feeling desperate. So I'm with you there. I I know how you're feeling. So just hold things loosely during the 2 weeks between this eclipse and the next eclipse. Things will get better and will feel better, with a little asterisk, because we're then going in October. I have like a month. In October, we get the Venus retrograde with a Mercury retrograde, and so we're going into more upheaval, but at least the eclipse things are wrapping up. And because Venus is so kind of heavily impacted at this time, not by the eclipses, but by the other astrology, I do think the eclipses are actually an excellent setup for the Mercury and Venus retrogrades, where we've had this Mercury retrograde that tails up to this one, was rough for everybody. Then we have these eclipses, and it's preparing us for that kind of double trouble duo that we're going to see. So see this as a preparation and as something that's going to help you moving forward, rather than being like, oh no, not another retrograde. And the reason Venus retrogrades and Mars retrogrades are so big is they kind of happen every other year because of the orbit. So they don't happen as often, and they do tend to be very disruptive. Anyways, especially if you have strong Venus or Mars rulership. Anyhoozle, let's get into the tarot. Put my notes aside. I always love to bring the tarot in to kind of give an extra perspective, to look at the things that maybe I missed, to give a non-astrological view, although I do use astrological associations and tarot, so it's all kind of wrapped together. Oh, and is there anything else I want to say about this eclipse? Yeah, hold on. You're going to see it also in your family dynamic and in your work and stuff. Older people either retiring or being asked to step down, or just a very obvious need for fresh energy and fresh input, and also a need to respect all people regardless of their age. Not just this kind of top heavy thing we've gotten set up in the US, where like younger folks are told that they're the problem and they're causing everything, and then the older folks get to hoard wealth. And believe me, I know not all people who are in those older generations have money, but as a whole, y'all have more cash than the younger generations. And we have a lot less, and we're splitting it with other generations at the same time. I think they've lumped Gen Z and millennials together because we have so little between each other. The Hanged One. Yep. Yeah, and this is kind of how first eclipses can feel because you have to wait for that final eclipse. There is this element of, stuff not moving, the wheel of fortune. Oh yes, with Jupiter conjunct Mercury, this is there. I do think this can be an opportunity for people to like pop off, to get lovely visibility, to get wonderful traction, to attract the people who are aligned with them. It's just never that simple with eclipses, which is why I'm always like, let's take this with caution. And we have the Page of Swords. Yeah, this is really big energy, and the only way to really participate in it is to kind of accept that there's not much you can do and that you have to kind of buckle up for the ride. And like I said earlier, a part of it's about consenting with the universe to be like, hey, I'm open to see where this goes. I'm open to see how things pan out and how they happen. Um, Obviously, I'm holding true to my ideals and my desires and my dreams, but I'm also open to the universe maybe giving me even more than I was expecting rather than being so rigid in an idea. Like maybe you want um, like a career and to travel all the time and all of these things. And the universe is like, oh, we can give you that, but we can also give you like a really lovely place to live when you're not traveling. And if you're so hyper focused on the travel and the career that is tied to travel that you kind of miss that you could also cultivate a really nice space that feels like home to return when you're done after your travels. Um, or you could um, want to maybe work at a nonprofit, or you feel like you want to give more to your community, and the universe is like, maybe we don't have to do a job where you self-sacrifice all the time and you like can never take care of yourself, but we get a job in a non kind of service related field, but you're so well funded that you have time to volunteer and to give back to your community in a different way, and in a way where you don't have to kind of be tied to labor in order to do it. It's something you can do in your free time, and you now have the money and the resources because you have a better job rather than working for a nonprofit. And as someone who has had many friends who work in nonprofits, you usually do less serving the community and you do more managing toxic workplace environment. I'll just say that. And I feel like that's a specific message to someone watching this. One of you is thinking about working for a nonprofit. And I'll tell you, oftentimes you are better off. Ooh, this card flipped over. Oftentimes, where did it go? Oftentimes you are better off finding an alternative route. You can do a lot more in your community doing other things. Okay, Two of Swords, a choice. I do also think, like I said, because Venus is so heavily kind of involved in the sky, I do think there's also a choice of values where you are going to be challenged. I think for some of you, this challenge is definitely, oh, I actually want something different. But I think there's also a contingent of where you have been asking for something consistently. You have been committed to a manifestation or desire, and the universe is now sending right before it comes in. So probably sometime within September or October, right before this comes in, the universe is like, do you really want those things? And they send you almost maybes, which is, I see this a lot in my practice with clients who are really working on manifesting or really want something. Right before they get it, they will send an almost maybe. And if you take the almost maybe, it's not necessarily horrible or bad, but you're not sticking to the things that you said that you wanted. And so sometimes you can end up missing out or having to take a bit of a longer route to the thing that you actually wanted. And like I said, for some of you with this Apprentice of Swords and the Wheel of Fortune, it is you changing your mind about something and being like, oh yeah, that dream is outworn. That desire is something that I wanted back when I was in my early 20s, and I'm just not that person anymore, or, and move the age around to whatever is your thing. And so this is more about kind of making an internal decision that's going to have external consequences, and consequences are neutral because we have the Hanged One. Like, you're not going to be doing or functionally acting on these things, but you are making those choices so that once things get moving forward and you have a bit more control and ability to materially shift things, you have a clear perspective and you're now realigned. So either that's a recommitment to something that you've already been manifesting and wanting, or if it's you being like, oh, actually, the reason I wanted that thing was because it was like a societal thing, not because it was something that was innate to me. Let's pull two more. Let's see. I'm also going to do another little mini reading for those of you who don't want to watch the full video. It'll be a little different from this. There she blows. Yeah. this is also going to be really overwhelming. I don't think it's any new or fresh trauma for most of us. We do have the Three of Swords and the Ten of Swords, but we do have the Knight of Pentacles. It's the champion this deck, and I was trying to remember the name. I don't think this is new because we have this Knight of Pentacles in it. We have been working on and processing and moving through something, but it is going to be amplified. Also, there is a moon in this Ten of Swords, which is not always the case. Um, but there's an element of continued healing. It also feels like, especially with Chiron stationing retrograde and heading back towards Aries, there is an element of this moon being very healing. But it's kind of like, and I was talking about this with a friend, and I say this another thing that I probably repeat too much, but when I was little, there was a book called Going on a Bear Hunt, and one of the phrases that's repeated over and over again is, "We can't go over it, we can't go under it. Oh no, we have to go through it." You have to process and move through your emotions, and you have been, so give yourself kudos for that. But to kind of, I feel like you might be getting to the core of something at this time. And you kind of have to prospect the spectrum of emotions and processing the loss while taking on the new ideas that are also coming through at this time. And so give yourself grace. It is going to be an overwhelming time just by nature. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it's going to be. We have the High Priestess. I was like, I'm going to pull one or two cards. Meanwhile, half the deck. I don't think we're going to get that far. Ooh. Oh. So we actually have the King and the Queen of Cups. There is an element, I think, of you finding some balance. I also think for some of you, this is you meeting someone. Like you are one of these cards and you meet the other person. For some of you, romance is dicey during eclipses, but it might be the setting of the stage for some of you meeting someone important. It doesn't have to be romantic. It can also be a friendship or a mentor or someone who's going to shift the trajectory of your life. Like being their friend really changes where you go. Like maybe years from now, you move to the same city because you met this person randomly during an eclipse season. We also have the High Priestess here. And so it is about deep connections, processing. And if you think about the themes of the King and Queen of Cups, it's about finding harmony within the push and pull of emotions and being mature without being too harsh and being empathetic without being too soft so that you don't sacrifice parts of yourself. And so there's also an opportunity for regulation and spiritual flow during this time. So I really encourage you guys to really tap into your spiritual practice and really listen and sit with yourself during this eclipse season, because I think some really important messages are coming in. And now I promise, last card. We have the Fool. Yeah. I really feel this eclipse season is really setting the stage for a lot of change, especially if you've been feeling stagnant. So have hope, have faith. Things are coming, things are shifting, things are changing. A different life is right on the horizon, especially if you've been seeking one. If you haven't been seeking one, this is a renewal of energy and a recommitment or a reconnection to a life that you already have. But it is very beautiful, and I think you're just, all of us are just going to be processing at like top speed for a minute. And so let yourself do the processing, but also recognize that you're going to have to counterbalance and take care of yourself physically. So drinking, eating, um, you may during these eclipses spend a little less time outside. So yeah, just taking care of yourself, preparing yourself for what feels like is going to be a massive leap as we move through once we get through this and we go through the fall and into the winter and through that Mars retrograde that actually starts on January 10th. But we don't have to think about that. But it does feel like we're being set up for next year. Also, there are triple eclipses in the summer of next year, so it feels like something really big is coming up. Like I said, good or bad, depends on your chart, depends on what you're experiencing, but definitely transformative and life changing. Anyways, my loves, that is the astrology and tarot reading for this solar eclipse in Leo. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, comment, do all the things. You can follow me over on Instagram. I also offer readings of all kinds, psychic channeling, spirit baby, tarot, astrology, fertility, fertility astrology readings. I offer a lot. So if you're interested in a reading, you can go check that out over on my Instagram or my website at thekeenwitch.com. Anyways, my loves, many blessings, and I wish you all of the energy and stamina to move through this eclipse in the way that works the most magically and beneficial for you. Many blessings.